Hey everybody, I'm Fridel Capistrano. I narrate audiobooks. I happily spend time reading from my home studio here in California. You are listening to my podcast where I interview the authors I have narrated for. Thanks for tuning in to Readers on Writers. Our writer today is Sara Zarr. Sara Zarr is the author of A Song Called Home. Sara is also the acclaimed author of 11 books, a creative writing teacher and coach, and host of the This Creative Life podcast. While she's often in her hometown of San Francisco and Pacifica, California, she currently lives in Salt Lake City, Utah with her husband and cat. A Song Called Home is Sara's 10th book and first middle grade novel. Inspired by her own San Francisco childhood, it follows fifth grader Lu Emerson through some big life changes and challenges, and her father's unresolved issues with addiction and instability. The New York Times called A Song Called Home deeply affecting and achingly authentic. Readers on Writers is like a small coffee table book club with our best friends. Our main goal is to learn more about each other in our respective fields, narrators and authors, and specifically regarding the book we are featuring. So take a sip from your favorite mug because it's time to welcome our special guest. Sara Zarr.
Hi, Fridel Capistrano.
Yes. So, how is it going?
That's a loaded question in 2022. I mean, like on the one hand, like bad, going really bad, but on a personal, my day-to-day life is fine and good at the moment. It's summer in Salt Lake City. It's hot, but it's also just it's very casual here year round anyway. You're just out there in your bike shorts and t-shirts and cutoffs and swimsuits until September. Yeah. And we have a little pool at our condo. So, we're trying to make the most of it.
Oh, that's nice. Swimming is nice.
How's it going for you?
It's going well. I'm really happy to have you here. I've been looking forward to chatting with you since I spent several hours on your book. And I was so curious after reading it. I was like, man, I would love to get to know Sara. And thus, Readers on Writers was born.
I love the concept of this podcast. I think people who are book people are going to love it. Especially audiobooks are just more and more popular every year. I think people are really curious how that all works.
Yeah.
From kind of both sides of it. So I think it's an awesome idea for a podcast.
I'm fascinated even being within the scope of the work. Yeah. So let's talk about A Song Called Home. What a beautiful book. Oh, there it is.
Thank you.
In hard copy.
I know. You probably only ever saw when you're actually doing the recording, do you just have it on an iPad?
I think I recorded your book with my Kindle. I had it up on a stand, and that's how my setup was at the time. Now I actually just have it right in my studio. I have it on my computer and I scroll silently as I...
Has that changed from when you started? Because I recorded the first few of my books, the audio myself, or I should say I got cast by the people who did the audiobook. And when I did that, which was 2008 or something, I had to go to Los Angeles.
Wow. To
the listening library studio. And I had the printed manuscript on a music stand, just flipping the paper. Was it like that when you started, or did you start after everything went digital?
I started when things became digital. I started in the end of 2019. So it's been a short run for me, but it feels like it's been a long time.
You've been busy.
Yeah, it's been really lucky that I've gotten one book after the other, and I'm so
well,
grateful.
You're a great reader, which is
thank you.
Authors, for listeners or viewers of the podcast who are curious how it works. Not to anticipate all your questions, I'm a podcast host too.
Yes.
So I'm always just used to
being the interviewer,
facilitating the conversation.
Of course, yeah.
But so my publisher sent me 3 samples. This is usually how my publisher does it. They send me 3 samples of people they've identified as being a potential good match. And I listen to them and rank them according to my preference. And then they make an offer to the first, and go down the list like that. So I listened to several and they were all good. I mean, every reader who's working has skill, obviously. But I just felt like you were a really great match for this story. I saw that you were like living in the Bay Area and you had lived in California for a while before that. And this is a California book. I just felt like you were going to get the whole California thing, which is just different from how people back east sound. So that was a big plus for me.
Yeah. And when Lu gets her guitar, I was just so moved by that because the guitar is such a special instrument to me. Everything
Oh, I
about the
didn't
book
know
was,
that.
oh, really? Yeah. I was taking piano lessons as a little girl, and I did not vibe with classical piano. I wanted to like express myself, and I begged my parents to quit my piano lessons and said like I wasn't giving up music. I'll switch to learning the guitar. And my parents were like, you can only get a guitar if you're valedictorian. I was in grade 7 at the time.
Whoa.
I know, right? Like no pressure whatsoever.
Wow.
And I know my
That's intense.
it was super intense. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. And somehow I managed to pull it off. And the day of my graduation, my dad walked into the door with an acoustic guitar case. And I could not wait till after the ceremony and the little like after party in my grade 8 graduating class. And when that ended, I rushed home and spent all night until 2:30 in the morning learning all my major and minor chords. And I learned
that's
right away.
Okay, so you're kind of a type A personality, maybe?
Oh, just a little bit.
Because that's intense. Like, one, it's painful to like practice that long when you're new and you don't have the calluses and stuff yet.
Yeah.
Anyway, I suppose I should introduce the book at some point.
Yes, please. So now that so let's there's my little story of my guitar life. But yeah, what inspired you to write a song called Home?
It was a variety of factors, some practical career stuff, which I think for anyone who's a working writer, trying to do it professionally or doing it professionally, you don't rely on inspiration because you have to keep paying the bills, right? So you can't sit around and only write when you feel like it if you're making a go of it professionally. So it was a time in my career to come up with my next idea. I had finished one book and I was thinking about what I was going to do next. I needed to get another contract, like iron in the fire, so that I could know that I was going to have money, in the next year. And I had been writing young adult fiction. So that's my first like 6 or 7 books were young adult. And I hadn't really given that much thought to middle grade, actually. And this song called Home is middle grade, which just means it's like the characters are usually between age 8 and 12, maybe 13 on the higher end. And that's sort of the audience as well. Whereas young adult is like 13 and up. But both my editor and agent were like, have you ever thought about doing middle grade? Because the YA market right now is not the best for the kind of books that I write. I mean, it's good for some writers, like dark fantasy, epic, things that are going to be a series, high concept stuff, or like really intense romance type of things. Those are doing well. But I always write these kind of stories about families,
grounded
and just like people living daily, like regular daily life. There's no portals or creatures or anything like that. It's just like life as we know it. So both my editor and agent suggested, middle grade might be a good place for you to write your kind of stories now. So why don't you think about that? So I thought about myself at age 10 or 11. And well, what was happening in my life when I was age 10 or 11 was like, my parents got divorced, my mom remarried, we moved. It was a lot to be going through right at that age. So I just kind of started there. with a character who is not really like me, but just her circumstances were based on my real experiences. And just she's sort of on the brink of her mom getting married and her getting ready to move to her stepdad's house, and just everything changing in a way kind of for the first time. I mean, that's the thing when you're a young character. Part of what makes stories about young characters interesting is they're going through all these things that might be like common life experiences, but they're going through it for the first time. So it's emotional, it's heightened. So I kind of started from there, and also brought in an experience I had when I was a kid, which was my mom was a cellist. She is a cellist. She doesn't play that much anymore, but she is a cellist and plays guitar and piano. She went to music school, so she plays a bunch of instruments. But when my parents moved to San Francisco in the 70s from Ohio, they kind of sold everything so they could afford to like make this move. And so my mom had sold her cello, and she didn't have a cello for the first, like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years we were in San Francisco. And also we were like very poor / broke. We were always barely making ends meet, getting grocery assistance, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, one day there was a knock on the apartment door, and my mom went down the stairs to open the door, and there was no one there, but there was a cello there. So like someone who knew her and knew she played and knew she missed it had just like bought her a cello anonymously and left it on the porch. So I also started the book with it being the main character, Lu. It's her birthday or near her birthday, and someone leaves a guitar on their porch. So I kind of brought those two experiences together to at least create a situation for the characters to start off the story. And then for me, shaping the plot and like how it's going to be an actual plot is a lot of what Revision is about, because I don't think in terms of plots. I'm always thinking more about characters.
That is so fantastic. I really love how the book starts off like right in the middle of it, like putting things into boxes, and that surprise of the guitar. I remember reading it and having to stop recording, being like, who could that have possibly been from? Like, it had to be from her dad, like, or maybe Steve.
It's a secret. Yeah. I mean, It's been revealed in some of the reviews, but that's okay.
Yeah.
The story doesn't depend on it being a secret.
Right. But I was still so floored. I was like, what an amazing surprise. What a twist in events. Like, was it from her mom? Like, I need to know. And like, I have to meter that in my narration to like not speed read to get to the point where I find out. That's pretty amazing. Would you say that was one of your favorite moments from the book, or is there a particular line that stands out?
My favorite scenes to write are scenes between people where they're just having like a difficult human interaction or a poignant one, just like writing emotional experiences. So like the plot events, including like the guitar showing up, feels more arduous for me because I just have to figure out how to do it without overplaying or underplaying it. But I just really love, like, I guess with a song called Home, one thing that comes to mind is a conversation between Lu and her stepdad. They're still really getting to know each other because this courtship with her mom has happened really fast, which is what happened with my mom and my stepdad. And so she's just kind of getting to know him, and there's a scene they have out in the backyard, and he's kind of sympathetic with her lack of having a father figure, and he's like, I didn't really have a dad either. And they just have like this great moment where she realizes, oh, like maybe I can trust him, and maybe there's like a potential future for me where I'm not just upset all the time about my dad. Just showing those different models of what might be possible in life as you grow up.
I really love the conversations your characters have within one another. It's the dialogues are just they're so real and they're so impactful. Um, and even the experience that Lu has in memory of her dad, there was one line that really struck me, and I don't have it memorized verbatim, but it's how she had to keep her feelings small to make
Mm-hmm.
room for how big her dad's emotions were.
Yeah.
And that actually kind of healed me a little bit
Mm.
from, like big adult emotions. And I was like, wow, like Sarah, this is exactly what I needed to hear as my 10-year-old, 12-year-old self.
I mean, that is another thing that inspired the book was my dad was an alcoholic. He passed away, I think he was only like 68 or something like that. And he was an acute alcoholic for all of my life, much like Lu's dad in the book, where just cannot keep anything together, like not a functioning alcoholic, and very like dramatic and maudlin and all of that when he was drinking. So those emotional experiences that Lu has around living with someone like that definitely come from my experience as a kid, but even more so my adult perspective of being able to process that with therapy and all of that, and just like go back and kind of, it's healing for me too, to just write like, oh, like little 10-year-old Sarah, she's gonna be okay, but it's hard, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious if you, when you started doing audiobooks, did you start right away with, because I just noticed you have a lot of middle grade credits.
Yeah.
Did you intentionally go for that niche, or did you kind of just find yourself getting cast there?
Well, when I first started, I found out that erotica and romance were the highest grossing genre of audiobooks. And I went, oh no. So the first books I have done were eroticas and French language
Oh.
books. Yeah. And I think just because of the sound of my voice, young adult and middle grade were just what fit.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, they're actually like my favorite genre to read. There's something that I just like love reading them. Sometimes like when the content is just too mature, I find it too boring. Like there's no dreaming, there's no like coming of age. So
Mm-hmm.
it did just find me. It wasn't intentional, but yeah, I much prefer this genre of books because I find that they're much better written. No offense to romance and erotica, but
well, those are like, yeah, like genres that have to follow certain tropes because that's what readers expect from it. What's also nice about middle grade books, I imagine, although I know a lot of romances can be pretty short, but just the shortness that you can wrap your mind around, you can kind of hold the whole story in your head, I would think, versus a big epic like 600-page adult novel where there's like all these voices you have to remember, and the plot things that matter for how you read them and all of that.
Exactly. And I always try to differentiate all the voices of the characters I read. So when I'm having to do like an erotica voice, it's just me and me. Like, oh my.
Oh, that second one I know is popular.
And I'll come out of me. And I'll come out of the booth like kind of sweaty and like uncomfortable. Exactly. Like, oh goodness, who am I? And when it comes to certain young adult books, I find that the themes can be like even middle grade. I'm actually learning now that there is a difference between the two, because I always thought it was under the umbrella of young adult. But there's always these moments in every single one where I have to pause my recording and like not cry because they get so beautiful and so emotional. And I'm finding that authors are kind of encapsulating these things I feel like I never heard as a child, or the things that I never read in the books growing up. So I think it's really a curious thing. Like I can't, is it intentional? You're like, oh, I should include this theme in my book, or is it just?
I think people who get into writing for young readers, a lot of people come at it because they do love kids and they want to help kids. That's not my particular motivation. I don't have kids. Kids are fine. But I'm writing for me, really, and maybe for the kid I was. And when I was a kid, I just remember loving any book that felt like it was real. I just wanted it to feel like a real life, like I experienced. And kids are experiencing a lot of complicated stuff. So in modern publishing, I think there's an understanding that even young readers, there's a lot they can handle. And if they can't handle it, they won't read it. And a lot of them are living, I was a 10-year-old with an alcoholic in the house. Surely there's 10-year-olds today that have alcoholics in the house. Whatever the issue is, I mean, just open a newspaper. This is the lives that kids are living. It's the context they're in. So I think writers for young readers and their editors just know how to put those themes in stories at the right level, where it's like not too much. And there's still like an overall feeling of safety. When I first made this switch from young adult and writing a couple of middle grades, one of the more helpful pieces of advice I heard was that for middle grade, like young adult is that's a real, almost like not a final coming of age, because I mean, you do a lot of coming of age in your 20s still also and throughout life, but it's a major break, in adolescence, because you can be so independent. But in middle grade, it's like creating a world where a character can explore some of the hard things that they're starting to notice about people and the world, but in a like cozier, ultimately safe context, where in YA we kind of take that cozy safe aspect out more. But I think there's a way we try and hold young characters in a way where they're going to come out okay, because that's something readers need too.
Yeah, I'm realizing now that it makes a lot of sense that as authors, we're I'm guessing, like if I were writing to the capacity you were, it makes sense to be healing collectively. And that's sort of what comes out from your experiences and looking retrospectively at what you maybe wish you had or circumstances you would love to heal from or see from a different perspective. You did mention earlier how Lu has a conversation with Steve, and now Lu can sort of envision what her life can be like without having her father be a burden to, I guess, her entire being. One of my questions was, if you imagine your characters ever in the future as if, the book extended into the rest of their life, where would you imagine Lu?
First of all, I do actually, by the time I'm done with a book where I've done many drafts and gone through an editorial process and all of that, the characters really are real to me. Like I feel like I could run into them on the street. So they do live on for me. This was one reason my books don't have endings that are necessarily endings, and some readers don't like that. I've gotten some feedback like, I wish, not this book, but in my young adult, people wanted things wrapped up a little more, but to me, like, it never they just live on and on, so there's nothing ever really ends. But with Lu, it's funny, right now I'm actually writing a follow-up book. It's not a sequel. It's about another character in her world, and it's 2 years later, so I kind of know where she is 2 years later. She's thriving in 7th grade. And I don't know where she'll go after that, but I think she's going to be just fine.
I love that. I love how you can imagine running into them in the street. That's just like how alive the story is. And
yeah, they don't ever leave you, I don't think.
yeah.
When you've spent that much time creating them.
Yeah. So you started writing this, did you say March 2020?
Good question. That sounds about right. I know I was doing a big revision in summer of 2020. So I would say I probably started like the first little drafts in fall 2019, where I was first wrote the proposal to sell it to my publisher. Yes, I remember that because I remember my contract wasn't executed yet. And the pandemic started and everyone was like going home and things were shutting down. And I was terrified that my contract was going to get canceled. And I really needed that money. Like that was going to be the money I was going to live on for the next year. And I had no other money coming. And I was just obsessively checking my phone and my bank account to see if the direct deposit for the advance had gone through. And like, I was like texting my agent every couple of days, like, have you heard anything about the contract? And I was just convinced that it was just going to get canceled. Like publishers were just going to be like, pandemic, we don't know what's going to happen. We're just going to cancel everything. But that did not happen. So it was 2020. It was like all of the writing and rewriting happened that year.
And the check came through.
Yes. I've never been so relieved. I mean, I'm always relieved when I get paid. I'm sure you understand that feeling, but like I was very, very relieved.
Amazing. So what's the process like, from concept to waiting for the check to becoming an audiobook? Tell us what that's like.
Well, I've been doing this for a while now. So my first book was published in 2007. And I believe, let's see, Story of a Girl, Sweethearts, Once Was Lost, How to Save a Life, Lucy Variations, Gem and Dixie, Go Back Whenever. This is the 8th. Song Called Home is my 8th. So I've been through it a few times, which doesn't make it any easier. Like the writing itself doesn't get easier because you're always trying to do better, and every story requires different skills. But I sort of know myself a lot better now, where when it's going badly, I don't panic. I just, especially writing a first draft is the hardest for me, I think.
When you say badly, what is that?
Like, I'm just not doing anything. Like, I just don't, I'm frozen, you know,
Right.
And I'm just like, it's not like writer's block. It's just like, I don't know what happens next in the story. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what these characters should be doing. I forget how to write a book, all of that. So now when that happens, I'm like pretty zen about it. I'm just like, oh, well, I'll just do something else today.
Right.
Which is different from like waiting for inspiration. Like I was saying earlier, I can't sit around and wait to be inspired, but I've learned not to just spin my wheels for days on end if I don't know what I'm doing. So getting the first draft out is just a big hurdle. And then ideally my preferred process is then to do a second draft on my own, like finish the first draft, set it aside for a little bit, read it, take notes, figure out what I want to change, what's going to make it better, and then do a second draft on my own and then send that draft to my editor. That's my ideal. But because of publishing schedules and just life, I'm often in a situation where I'm turning in a first draft where I don't have time to do that second draft on my own. And I hate that. I don't know. There's pros and cons to sitting on it longer or not. So a lot of that depends on the publishing schedule, the editor's schedule, and all of that too. So then it's just a matter of talking, like having a long conversation with my editor. I just had a long, like 2.5-hour phone call yesterday with my editor on the next book about the first draft. And so it's having that conversation, rewriting it again. And then from there, it can be anywhere from like one major revision and one little one, or it could be like 3 big revisions and like 5 little ones, like it just whatever the book needs to like get done. And then I really rely on my editor to tell me when it's finished, because when you're in it that long, you can just lose perspective and not know. You're just like, am I making it worse now? Like somebody stop me. So I just rely on him to be like, yeah, I think you're done. And it's going to go into copy editing. And once it goes into copy editing, then it's all about producing the book. So you get a cover design, ideas start flowing, the interior design, the proofreading, the little corrections, the advanced reader copy. And then usually during that time, once it's in copy editing, if the publisher has bought audio rights, that is when they'll start talking about casting the audiobook. And that's when like I'll get those samples and rank them and try and get the reader I want. Audio rights aren't automatically sold when you get a book contract. So some writers, they might be signed with a smaller publisher that doesn't have an audio arm. So they still retain the audio rights and they're free to go sell that wherever they want or produce their own audiobook, whatever they want to do with their rights, they're allowed to do. Because my publisher does have an audio arm, they'll typically, that's included in the rights they're buying, and then they take care of producing the whole thing. Now, with my first few books, I was at Little Brown Books for Young Readers. And at the time, this is when I signed with them, they were not owned by Hachette yet. They were owned by Time Warner. And they had a relationship with Random House Listening Library. So Little Brown bought audio rights, but then it was actually Random House Listening Library that was producing the audiobooks. And with my first book, I was all new to it. Sometimes it's good to be naive, but I was just asking my agent, I'm like, what if I want to do the audiobook? What do I do? And he was like, well, we don't usually do that, but here's what you could do. So he just mentioned to my publisher that I was interested in throwing my hat in the ring to do the audio, because I know doing high school drama is not equivalent to being a professional book narrator. I'm not saying that, but I did always love reading aloud, and I felt really connected to the characters in that first book. And I wanted at least to try to get that job. So I made like a CD. This is back in CD days. I burned a CD of reading the first few chapters and sent it to Random House. And they're like, we love it. Great. Why don't you come do that? And while you're here, do the audio on your second book, because this is probably like way more information than you or anyone wants to know. But
all information is good.
I'm remembering as I tell the story that the first book, they actually had not bought the audio rights, and it was a first book and no one knew how it was going to do, but then it was a National Book Award finalist that year. So then they sold the audio rights. So by the time they sold the audio rights, that first book, my second book was out, which is why they said, why don't you also do your second book while you're here? Because I had to like fly to Los Angeles, go to the studio. This was like before everyone had home studios. They had like a studio with like 5 different booths. So I met, you'd be on the coffee break and you'd meet like 4 other people doing their books in their booths. So I actually ended up doing those, and then they called me back to do my third book. So I did those 3, and then I did my fourth book was dual narrators, and so they cast 2 voice actors to do that. And then my 5th book I did, but that was different. I was in Salt Lake. They didn't have me go anywhere. but they hired an engineer in Salt Lake City at a local studio. So I went there and me and the engineer were there, but then the director was on the phone from LA or wherever. So, I mean, do you direct your own or do you have a director?
I've had to direct my own.
Do you like that or do you wish you had a director?
I haven't experienced what it's like to have a director yet, but I just received a new title for Audible Studios where I'll be recording in studio for the first time. And for me, my process on my own is like, I'll know when I'm reading something and I'm like, I don't believe that, or I could read that better. And then I'll play it back, or like I was distracted. And that's sort of my only I guess compass in knowing what my read could have been like. And then I'll have to go back and like play it until like I'm actually happy with it. So sometimes it can take a little longer because I'm really particular about making sure I do justice to the authenticity and sincerity of the characters or of the story. So it could go both ways.
I loved having a director, and I think you will like it.
Yeah.
It's just, she's just there. And it was Cassandra Campbell, who's a great reader in her own right. She's there on the other side of the glass and just, yeah, like you said, just making sure, like, just really gently, she'd be like, let's try that one more time, just a certain line. Or she could tell I had some weird mouth noise or whatever, to just bring out the best in a performance without you having to personally obsess and question yourself with every time.
And I love being directed. I just like love being told what to do, because that input is like your own personal challenge to be like, can I do what you have asked me to do? Yeah.
And
that's cool.
And there's a freedom in that too.
Yeah.
Of not being responsible for every single piece, which I just, I can't imagine how different it is now, because as I understand it, most narrators now, or reader, what's the term that you use? Narrator, reader, voice actor?
All of the above apply.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know most now do have home studios and are doing the whole process themselves.
Yeah.
Which is just really different from what I experienced when I did it. And I think it would be, of course, it's nice to have the flexibility of like live wherever you want to live and work how you want to work. But I would also really miss, it's just a lot to handle. And I hope you guys get paid that extra that they're not paying to like engineers and directors.
Yeah.
Like they were.
Depending on who you're reading for, sometimes we're lucky enough to just read it, do like the punch and roll version where there's like no mistakes, and you send it out and then you just get it back with all of the corrections you need to do. Some of the books I had to do in the beginning were like, I had to read it, I had to edit it, I had to make sure it sounded right, it had to be mastered. And those were the books when I wasn't getting paid for very much. I wasn't getting compensated to the amount I am now with less work, just because they were just independent publishers. And
you're just trying to get traction.
Exactly. I was trying to get my foot in the door, and I did learn so much about what the process took. And I feel like a lot of people are interested in becoming audiobook narrators, but I don't think they conceive how much work it takes.
It's tedious.
It really is.
Can be really tedious.
And then it's taxing on your body. You get dehydrated. You're looking at a screen for like 17 hours, perhaps not in a day, but over a period of time. And you're married to the text for so long. And
it's exhausting. I remember those trips to LA thinking before the trips, like, all right, I'll do that. Because they were like, well, the way we work in the studio is, the most productive time is really like 10 to 3. And we just find that that's, unless you're really a professional, you can't do much more than that. And I was like, great, I'm going to like go out on the town. I'm going to visit with friends. And I could not speak.
Tired.
I could not. I would just like lay in my hotel room and just like, I'm so tired. You're just concentrating so hard.
Yeah. It's amazing. I love that you actually had that experience, because it's like, it's kind of like the fantasy to get flown out to the studio and record. But the reality is, it's like, I am exhausted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually very cool. But I mean, what's lucky is now I know I can, if I have a book, I'll do the prep work and know how much time it'll take me. So I can break it up into like 1 hour sessions, because after, like, sometimes I'll do like a long session in case I have a lot of things to do, but like 4 hours in this chair in this room destroys my back.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't do that.
And
And then how do you, so when you go back, when you're breaking it into sessions like that, how do you, so you stop, let's say you take half hour, come back to your closet. What do you do to make sure like your voice now sounds like it did at the end of the previous, so it's consistent?
Yeah, I think what's really lucky is I innately am like good at cold reading. And especially if the text is already consistent, it just dictates the read. If there's suddenly like a change in like tone in the book, it's like I become like a completely different person in a way. So I'll usually try and make sure that like I'm taking a break or stopping like when the chapter ends, or like I'll look ahead and be like, oh, okay, this is the same. And then I'll come back into it. But
that makes sense.
Yeah, I used to be able to think I could record 2 books at a time. And that was really hard, because it's actually like you have to memorize all the voices. You have to memorize the tone. I have to keep the voice the same. And my voice doesn't change too much, because a lot of the books I've read have been young adult and middle grade.
Like a single point of view, not too many characters.
Exactly. Yeah. And they have been first person point of view. So it's like, I find that a lot easier, because third person is like, you are presenting. This is, it's a little more detached, and first person, I can actually infuse myself into the book, and it's more alive, and I can be consistent that way. Yeah.
You talked about some of those early books you did being like with independent publishers and authors. And I know that's like a huge realm that a lot of people, well, like you said, they think they want to get into it, or they do want to get into it. What do you think of like that whole world of like ACX or Find a Way, where it's just freelance folks doing their own stuff for indie authors? Like, does that end up being worth, I'm not sure what I'm asking, except I equate it with the rise in self-publishing for books has been so massive over the last few years. And one thing I did during the first, well, through all of the pandemic, is I was just curious. I wanted to learn everything I could learn about self-publishing. And I just decided I'm going to self-publish a little companion book to go with my podcast, just to see like, how do these platforms work, and how much work is it really when you're doing it on your own, and what's the potential revenue and all of that. So I did do this little, just like a little book that goes with my podcast. It's just sort of reading between the lines of the writing life, just some various, just advice, stuff I've learned over the last 15 years. But as I got into learning about that, I started learning about all of the, what the audio side of that looks like. So I don't know. What do you make of all that? And
yeah. I mean, I would love to pick your brain about all that, because my husband is a writer, and I'm like just a little cheerleader in the back trying to help him self-publish. And I also serve as his editor. So there's like a whole other world to that. But the ACX world, I think what I've experienced and a lot of my peers and colleagues discuss is how sometimes we'll get offers from publishers or their producers or whoever is on the other end, and the offers per finished hour are like $40 an hour. And I think it's because they don't understand how much work goes behind the audio side of things, from the reading to the editing.
Those are like indie published people offering. Yeah. That's
exactly. It's absurd. And so, and I have been lucky, because I have a friend of mine who's like a veteran audiobook narrator. He's done like over 200, 300 books. And I was able to ask him before I was taken advantage of or learn the hard way. And so when I tell people who express interest when I tell them this is what I do and this is what pays my bills, they go, oh, I've always wanted to do that. Like, how do I start? And I go, if you go on ACX, don't accept anything that's under $75 per finished hour if the book is over 4 hours long, because every 10,000 words is an hour of reading.
It just doesn't add up. Yeah.
It's definitely not lucrative if you're just starting out, and it'll just tire you out. And I don't want people to burn out on something that's like such a magnificent experience and career. I don't know what it's like on the other end, but I know like the whole process of writing a book and trying to get it published and getting it out there has always felt really daunting. Like, how do you get eyes on this thing? Like, is anyone going to read it? How do I get a publisher? How do I get an editor? All that stuff that I actually would love to actually learn about from you. But
there's a lot of hurdles to get traditionally published. And like the first one is just usually getting an agent, because with the big publishers, if you don't have an agent, your manuscript's not really going to get read. There's exceptions to that. But so that hurdle itself can just take years, to just get your work to the point where you can catch the attention of a literary agent. And then from there, things can happen quickly, or it can be another, long wait before things happen. But then you're in a system, and not to turn this into an advertisement for my book, but I actually write about this in this book, sort of comparing the traditional publishing versus self-publishing, because then you're in a system where they have distribution, they have marketing, they have designers, they sort of take care of everything. All you have to do is write. Whereas when you're self-publishing, you're doing all the pieces yourself or hiring people and paying out of pocket for them to do that. And then if you don't already have an established name, how are people going to find your book among the billion other books that are on Amazon or wherever? So, but what the reason I wanted to learn was, I think every traditionally published author should learn how the self-publishing works and just like try it, even with something small, because you never know if you have a book that's not selling well, like a traditionally published book that goes out of print or, winds up at the discount bins or whatever. There's always a chance you could get the rights back for that, and then publish it yourself, do something different with it, take control of the process, especially if you feel like, if you're a small author at a big publisher and you just feel like you fell through the cracks, maybe there's a chance for your book to have a second life as self-publishing. And also, I think every traditionally published author has had the experience of just trying to do something that's like a little offbeat or a little outside your brand, or just things that your publisher or agent or whoever are just like, oh, like, we don't really want to see that from you. Then you're empowered to go do it under a pen name, do whatever you want. It's just total freedom to be in charge of the whole thing. But you have to love learning how to do things. If you don't love learning how to do things, self-publishing is going to be frustrating. And I'm sure it's the same with being a self-produced audio person. Like, you have to be curious, and you have to be like someone who researches things and likes being self-taught and is okay with trial and error and all of that. So some people, if they're not into that, I think they're just going to get frustrated. But I don't know. I think there's so many tools now for authors and readers and everyone to do things on their own. And there's pros and cons to that, like with everything.
Yeah, I think those are absolutely wise words to live by, that you have to love the process and the learning and the perseverance it takes, because the idea of what you think you're doing will involve all these other things you didn't think were required. Like,
you have to love problem solving. Like, it's all just kind of a puzzle that you're constantly trying to figure out.
Yeah.
And if you don't like that process, you're gonna be unhappy.
I actually have a question. So when did you officially become an author? And when did you decide that this was something you wanted to do?
Let's see. I would say it was around 1995 or 96. I was in my mid-20s. That's when I started thinking seriously about writing for publication. And I did not study it in college. I never took a creative writing class. I just wanted to do it. So I wrote a book from beginning to end. That's the first thing. I think that is my number one. People always ask me like so many different types of questions for different types of advice, and they're getting way ahead of themselves usually, because the very first thing you have to do is write to the end of something. Like if you can't push yourself through the boring and hard parts of getting to the end of something, then all this stuff about like, how do I get an agent? How do I do this? And it's irrelevant because if you can't get yourself to finish something,
you don't have a finished product.
Yeah. So I think I kind of knew that innately. I wouldn't have been able to articulate it then the way I just did, but I knew like I had to finish something. So, and to me, like I respond well to external pressure. So there was a contest that had a deadline. That was a contest for a young adult novel. And I was like, great, I'm going to finish something in time for this contest. I did not win. That book never got published. So, I mean, it's not like some big hero journey story, but it's just like, that was just
you
like,
did it.
I did it. I finished something. And I was like, wow, I really can finish writing a whole novel. So then I wrote another one and another one. So it was my first published book in 2007, which if you're keeping track was like 10 years later.
10 years, yeah. A little over.
Was the fourth book that I wrote. So those first three books were just like learning how to do it. Practice. Not just craft wise, but just like how to finish something when no one cared. Like right. There's a lot of books in the world, and a lot more now than there were when I started. And if you don't care, like no one else is going to care. So Absolutely. Just like making myself be the one to care so I could like push myself to do like this 10-year process that was much longer than I expected it to be. So yeah, it was 2005 I sold that book. So it was right around 10 years from writing the first book to like finding the right agent and selling the book. And then it took a couple of years for it to actually come out. So I would say I started thinking of myself as a writer after I finished, or while I was like writing that first book that I knew I was going to finish.
It's pretty amazing. What were you doing in between?
I always was working. I mean, I've been working since I was 16. Yeah. So I actually, at the time, I think I had just quit a job where I worked as a representative for an account rep for a commercial printer.
Cool.
And then I was an office manager for a small business. I think I was working like 30 hours a week, but I always, through up until like that fourth book that I sold, I always had at least a 3/4 time job, if not a full-time job, like a 9 to 5. So yeah. It was like evenings, weekends, sometimes at work.
Yeah. I love that.
I mean, especially once I remember this one job where like I got my own office and I was like, ooh, I'm just going to write my book in here.
Which book?
Sorry, past anonymous employer. That was probably that first book. Yeah.
I used to do that too when I was living in Toronto, and I called it like inception work because I was working within working.
Yeah, I love that.
That's so fun. Yeah, I think that's how we kind of keep the dream alive. Like it follows you, right? You can't not do the thing.
Yeah, if you can not do the thing, then don't do the thing, because it's not like you're not going to get rich, and it's hard work. So you have to really want that. And there's a lot of reasons that are my motivators for wanting to be a writer. It's not always like it's all about the art. A lot of it is like it turns out being self-employed is great for me. Like I have a chronic illness. I have just, I get migraines. There's like a lot of issues. I don't like people. Like there's a lot of things that I like being alone. I do like people, but I also really like being alone. So there's a lot of things that make being a writer and being self-employed great for me, and having
Absolutely.
control over my schedule and all of that. So when I'm not feeling like the art part of it, those things are enough to keep me going. Just be like, I need to be self-employed, and I need work I can do independently, and I need work I can do from wherever. Like in the past 4 years, my husband's job was in California, but our place was in Utah, and I was like going back and forth. So I was trying to work from both places. So I don't know. It's not the romanticized ideal of being a writer that I used to fantasize about when I first started. It's much more pragmatic. It's much more boring. It's much more annoying, but it's also very rewarding. I feel really lucky to still be doing it like 15 years later, because it's just a lot of ups and downs.
Life. Right?
Yeah.
Life.
Oh, and the market changes so much. Like I was telling the story at the beginning, one reason I got into middle grade, because bottom line was like my last couple YA books just were not selling. And all my team was like, basically, I don't know if we're going to buy another young adult book from you right now. So, hey, why don't you try a middle grade? So that was like, oh, I have to adapt to the marketplace was part of it. But then within that, I found like a story I loved and wanted to tell. So it's always like this balance of practical capitalism, marketplace forces, all of that, and like
flexibility.
Exactly. And getting some kind of, you can't hate what you're working on. So
right.
You still have to find a way to do something that you want to do. And if I didn't want to do it anymore and no one was buying what I do want to do, then I would just go back and get a job that would support that. So
yeah,
it's just being an adult.
Not over. It's just, you got to go on to the next thing.
Yeah.
When you moved from young adult to the middle grade, was the first book you did, it wasn't A Song Called Home?
It was. Yeah.
It was.
So that was the first one.
Wow.
And then I'm just working on the second draft of the second one now.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, and then I'm also working on another young adult that I haven't sold it yet. I haven't shown it to anyone. So I still love writing that age. So we'll see what happens.
Well, let's go back to when we were talking about how the characters still feel alive to you, especially and specifically A Song Called Home. I recently took up surfing with my husband, like more seriously. So we'll drive down and we'll pass Pacifica, and I will actually look out the window at the houses because there's this beautiful like downhill bend and you can kind of see the whole area. And I'm like, yeah, I wonder where Lu moved to.
Well, I will say this. Anyone who knows the Bay Area knows that this view is not possible.
Absolutely not. I looked at the cover when I had
you're like, that's fake.
And I was like, this is not anywhere unless she's in a hovercraft or a helicopter.
Yeah, when I saw that my editor and I were talking about it, I'm like, it's emotionally accurate. Because she's like thinking about living in the city when she lives in the suburbs. So yeah, I think I grew up in San Francisco. And when my mom got remarried when I was 11, my stepdad lived in Pacifica, and we lived in the Lindomar area. So that last neighborhood before you go toward Half Moon Bay. So we lived, there's like the Lindomar Shopping Center, and we lived like a mile from that further toward the back of the valley. So that's sort of where I pictured her, in the Lindomar neighborhood, in a very general, somewhere between Lindomar and Odstad. I don't know.
Pretty awesome, because those are real places, and I get so excited when I'm like immersed in the reality of a book, and I'm like,
I mean, they have to go to the Taco Bell by the beach. That's required any book you're going to set in Pacifica,
right? We actually considered moving there just because it was closer to the ocean, and we're such ocean people.
I love Pacifica. That's
so nice.
Where my husband's job was for a little bit during the pandemic, and like you, we lived with my in-laws. I mean, you didn't live with my in-laws, but you lived with your in-laws.
That's how we know each other, Sarah. We're staying with your parents.
And that's a challenge as an adult, but they were really great to have us there. And then we were living in the school campus for a while, but it just it was really weird being there, because I think anyone who's gone back to the town they grew up in, if it's a small town, it's one thing. Like if you grew up in San Francisco and you go back, it's not the same emotional. Yeah. When you go back to like the small town you grew up in, it's just weird. My husband and I both, because we both went to high school in Pacifica, and we both expressed having this feeling of like, it feels like nothing in the last 30 years happened. And we're just like, we have not grown, we have not changed, we have not flown the nest. Like, it's just weird. It'd be like every person you see in the grocery store line, you're like, is that Michelle from high school? It's just, it's very strange.
I know, it's like a time warp.
Yeah. But it is a great little town. And, I have no complaints about Pacifica.
Yeah.
Other than all the, for people who don't know, there's a big like classic car culture in that area. And like every weekend people get out their dual muffler.
Yeah. It's like Santa Barbara or Ventura.
It's just extremely loud.
Parade.
Yeah. The cruising gets loud.
Well, that's good to know, because we specifically moved to Napa because it was so quiet, and any noise is like, I hear it. I'm so like finely tuned to.
Well, and professionally, noise. You can't you can't run your book narrating business in a noisy neighborhood.
No,
I mean, even if you have a good little home studio, you don't want to have like
classic.
You want to live by the fire station, let's just say.
I know, right? Like I've actually taken to recording like from 10 p.m. to like 3 a.m. just because the world is asleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it'll like screw up with my schedule, because I actually like, it's hard. I like being awake at night, but I also like the sun.
You also like not sleeping all day.
Exactly. But I'm like, I gotta get this book done. And getting interrupted, that is the most disruptive thing to my narration, is like, pause for sound.
Yeah.
Pause for the truck that's making circles. Well, it's like, I thought Napa was quiet. Yeah. Oh man, that's so funny. I look forward to going back to Pacific and going back to the Lindemar shopping center and be like, Sarah.
That was when I was in high school, I worked at the Round Table Pizza there.
Oh, I've seen that.
I know. I can't believe it's still there.
Right.
Round Table Pizza is still a thing.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I think it's like a thing when you go back to where you grew up, and it is a small area, and it's kind of like, you feel like you've grown up so much, or you've like, I don't know, surpassed so many obstacles, and, going through therapy, you're like a different person. And then you go back home and you're like, everything is the same.
Especially if you're living with your parents.
Yeah. I mean, it was lucky during the pandemic when we moved up here to escape LA and stay with my husband's parents. It was kind of refreshing for me, because they weren't my parents.
Right. Yeah.
But it was very cool to be able to record so many books in their walk-in closets and be like, oh, like, I don't think anyone knows I'm in my mother and father-in-law's closet between.
I'm just in the closet making a living.
Exactly.
Speaking of making a living, do you do in addition to narration work, like you mentioned something before we started recording about like voiceover workshops? Is that something you're running or something you're taking? Like, I'm curious, most freelance people I know are like cobbling together an income with various pieces. I know I am. I'm curious, like, what else you do to sustain yourself?
Well, my goodness, what do I not do? Well, in the voiceover world, this isn't actually to sustain myself, but to sustain my craft. I take lots of voiceover seminars and lots of voiceover coaching classes. And then in addition to that, I hold voiceover workouts with my peers or anyone who's interested in playing in between our auditions or in between jobs. And that I find is it's the most nourishing, because we just come in and we play and we talk about auditions and sides or copy, or I'll take things that I've learned in between and just like absorb all of it to just like spew out to my workout group.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like income, I do like luxury resale.
Oh, nice.
I'm learning how to be a helicopter pilot.
Oh my gosh.
I know. So that's actually probably like the thing I'm most excited about. Yeah. And I just do like random entrepreneurial things on the side. I do like graphic design and I feel like I'm blanking. Like, what are the
random entrepreneurial things sounds about right.
Right? I think that's like the scope of all the things.
The hustle, yeah.
Yeah, the hustle. And I think there's like a minor bit of like undiagnosed ADHD where like anything I have like a minor interest in becomes like this excited obsession for me. Like, how do I get good at this? And how do I make money off it? I have,
this is exactly me, what you're describing. And it's not good. Like, I think I've often wondered, like, should I get help for this? Because it's that obsessive, like you get that hyperfixation on something. And then because you are a freelancer, there is like that next thing of like, how do I turn this into like a little business or something? Right? I mean, the other day had an idea for a business, not the other day, a couple weeks ago. And just in the like 24 hours, I was fixated on it as like such a great idea. Like I registered a domain, I, got an email address, like all this stuff. Right. And I just had to I was like, Sarah, let's just slow down for a minute. Because you got enough to do right now. Like, and I've done that many times over, like in the past 5 years of just like, whenever I get the little GoDaddy thing about my domain expiring, I'm like, what was that? Oh yeah, that. I mean, because it's so cheap. It's like $20. And you're like, this is going to be my business.
Yep.
So now I'm just trying to sell all my domains from my things I didn't follow through on.
Oh, you can actually make so much money off that. Like,
you can probably not the ones I came up with, but one could.
Someone took, like, I had Ferdel.com as a
that
domain.
Would have been a good one. Yeah.
And then like I let it expire because like what was I doing with my life when I was like, I don't know, like 18 or something. And when everyone was like, oh, buy a .com, and you're like, okay, like my name is unique. And now it's like owned by somebody and it's like a completely fake like retail website. And I'm like, how do I get you back?
Oh, I know.
So whoever's out there who has my name.com.
It's so weird when you see someone else with your name. It just feels like a assault.
Yeah. I mean, as going on like road trips with my parents and going to the gas station, and my parents made my name up. It's my dad's name and my mom's name put together, which I feel like
Are they Ferdinand and Adele?
Close. Ferdinand and Delia.
Oh, I was close.
Yeah. Some people guess like Fernando or like, but yeah, for Ferdinand and Delia. And we'd go to the gas station. I'd look through the magnets and be like,
oh yeah, you're never going to find a Ferdel magnet.
As a child, I didn't understand. I was like, there's lots of Michaels. And
I mean, I couldn't even find a Sarah with no H. You're not going to find a Ferdel.
Upsetting, right? It like really screws with your identity when like you feel like you not my don't name. Exist. Exactly. Let's go back to the book because we're touching on identity. Not that I want to ruin this for any of the readers who have not actually gone this far in the book, but Louisa's process of becoming Lou, and then her identity and the way she looked. Did you experience that growing up, or was that like something you thought of for the character?
I think when you're that age, but I think it starts around that age that Lou is and continues probably into your 20s or beyond. You are really looking for like what external thing like best expresses who I feel like inside. So kind of in all my books, I realized I was talking to my editor yesterday about the draft I just turned in. And he's like, you've got like 2 different makeover scenes in this book and maybe just one. I was like, yeah, I think every single one of my books has the moment where it's like they get a haircut or put on a different kind of outfit, or, like with Lou, it's like changing the spelling of her name. I was in high school in the 80s. And when I was a freshman, I feel like every girl I knew changed the spelling of her name to something that they thought was cooler. So like, I don't know, like Susie, if it was just like Suzie, they wanted to spell it like Susie of Susie and the Banshees, which is like Siouxee or something like that.
Yeah,
so every girl is like trying to do that. So I think it's just something I never plan it out when I'm writing. And it always just, there's this moment where it's like, oh yeah, this is the moment. Like they're gonna get a haircut or try on clothes that just really make them feel different or something. And yeah, I still feel that way. I mean, I'm 51 and I still always feel like, what if I got rid of every single piece of clothing I have and just started over? It was just a whole different approach, I could be perceived as a completely different person. And like, I know a lot of women especially feel this way about their hair, of just like, if your hair
bangs
isn't right or something, you just feel like, I don't feel like me. I feel like people are not perceiving me because my hair is like 1 inch longer than I want it or something. It's just so, I mean, part of it is like misogynistic conditioning.
Oh yeah.
To like, I have to present in this certain way, but there is just that, even for men, I know, just to have clothing, that external expression of wanting to be perceived as close to how you feel like you are inside as you can.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of kids, this next generation of kids, is doing that so much more with playing with like gender identity and pronouns and just like being non-binary and like not being like, oh, well, skirts are only for this one category of person, but being like, maybe everyone can wear skirts. So it's just fun to see kids have so much freedom now that they, in the 80s especially, we were very, I must stick to my gender expression. So yeah, and I know like starting a new school is also a natural opportunity for that. So I think when Lu realizes she is going to have to change schools, it's just like, you really think about how, when I walk in there the first day, how do I want, this is my opportunity to either like be a new person or change my name or have the perception of myself completely reimagined. So I think that's just all that's going on in that moment for her.
Yeah, I wish I had the bravery to, I mean, that even applies to me like now in my 30s. I'm like, I should, like, I literally thought that the other day. I was like, I should get rid of all my clothes, but like, who do I want to be? Like, I'm also an on-camera actor, and I've had the same hair forever just because I'm like, I want to be consistent. I don't want to like upset.
You want to be
agents.
versatile. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, I think, and people would message me and be like, hey, I saw you on the Lowe's commercial. Congratulations. And I was like, I'm either I'm missing a check or someone looks like me. And I was like, it's time to chop off all my hair just so I can be a different version of me that it doesn't look like another version of me that's out there in a different dimension that's booking jobs. But yeah, it's so funny. It's like bangs, no bangs, short hair, long hair. I convinced my husband to grow out his hair because during the pandemic, I was cutting our 2 dogs. I was grooming our dogs and cutting my hair and cutting his hair, and I had enough. So I was like, why don't you grow your hair out for cancer? Just donate to charity, provide service. And so his hair is like so long. And when I presented to him, I was like, I'm going to cut my hair like really short. And he's like, you're telling me we're going to have the same haircut? And I was like, never mind. No, that's okay.
Yeah, twinning with your husband is awkward.
Yeah, seriously. From the back will look the same until you turn around.
So is it cut off now?
No, he's still growing it.
He's still got it.
Yeah, it's like, it's probably like, it's really wavy. So if he pulls it down, it's probably like up to here for him, like collarbone length. It's really big. And he's just like, please help me. And I'm like, no, give it to a child in need. He's such luxurious, beautiful hair.
Truly, share the joy.
Share the joy. All right, I want to ask you, what are your favorite must-haves to get you in the mood to write? Do you have any, or you just go for it?
I prefer to be at my desk. I have we have a 2-bedroom place. And when we first moved here, this was like the office. Now it's my office because he's been in California for the last few years. Now he's back. And like before he moved back, I warned him. I was like, I'm thinking of still just keeping the office as my office. I just really love having a room of my own and a door that closes. So I like being in my own space. I like to be like showered and dressed for the day. I don't like to just be feeling grimy in my PJs or whatever. I like to kind of have like an official start to my work day. I like to have maybe gotten errands out of the way. I used to, because I heard so many writers say over the years, like, you have to get your writing done first thing before everything else can take it over. So I've learned from myself that I actually like to have all my little stuff done so that I'm not thinking about it when I work. So sometimes that might mean I don't really start writing till like 3 p.m. And that's fine, because then I know like everything's done. Other times, if I'm experiencing a lot of issues with procrastination and resistance, then I do try and do it first thing before I can mess up my day too. Because I can always rationalize not working. But I just like to have my desk, water. Often I'll have music, sometimes not. But I do like to have music. Otherwise I get earworms, like I just will have a stupid song stuck in my head unless I have something else playing. I think that might be an ADHD thing too. And sometimes I like to work in a coffee shop if I'm really trying to get a change of scenery, a different energy, if I'm feeling distracted, or I'm like not enjoying cohabitation. I'll want to go to a coffee shop or a library or something to get into a different zone. But I'm pretty much like a homebody. I just like to work at my desk at home with my water.
I really like Salt Lake City. I've visited twice. One of my really good friends lives there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I I visited in 2019 for the first time. No, the beginning of 2020, and stayed with her in Salt Lake. And then we went again last year.
It's got a lot going for it.
Yeah.
I constantly think about leaving, but I've also been here 22 years now. So
yeah,
I don't know.
It's hard for me to stay in one place.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the clothes and hair thing we're talking about. It's just like, would I be a better, different, more interesting person if I lived somewhere else? So
the style in Utah is very interesting. I think in like Salt Lake, please don't tell me you have a very large hat.
No, I'm
okay.
I'm not in the boho aesthetic. But
just making sure.
There is a bit of an influencer culture, let's just say.
Yes.
Utah is like the cradle of multi-level marketing companies. A lot of because the LDS Mormon culture does value being a stay-at-home mom in a really specific way that goes with their doctrine. A lot of women are working from home. And so the multi-level marketing type companies and other side hustles and just influencing, all that stuff is a way that a stay-at-home mom can establish something for herself without having to like go get a day job. So it makes sense that all happens. But then you do see, I don't know, do you ever watch any of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake?
I haven't, but I've been told I should.
Oh yeah, if you're a fan of Real Housewives in general, it's interesting. I don't know. I'm more in the granola neighborhood. It's just like, your Keen sandals and your Tivas and your hiking shorts.
Oh yeah,
and,
the REI.
The REI. Yeah, I'm in the REI zone.
We were behind a pickup truck yesterday in traffic, and they had all the REI stickers. I was like, oh, I like those. And I was like, those are from REI.
It's a whole vibe.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I could be outside all the time, camping, outdoors, trees, hiking shoes. Yes. if I could only have Wi-Fi while also outside and also not have glare on my laptop at the same time, that'd be like the dream.
And no
Like,
noise.
exactly. My ideal, like if I had the ideal studio, it would have like a window to the outdoors and like I'd just see trees, or have like a skylight or something. Cause sometimes
Yeah.
I'll come out of the booth and be like, oh, it's really dark.
Yeah, you don't have any natural light in there. That's
not in here, no.
no. So you mentioned, or you alluded to writing. Are you a writer as well?
I would say I was a writer first.
Oh,
That
okay.
was like my first
Tell
love.
us more.
Of course. I think it just started with like, assignments in class, like poetry and creative writing. And I loved books. I loved writing. I sort of experienced the world almost like third person, just because I love the concept of having someone narrate in like an omnipresence kind of way. It was kind of how I functioned in life as a child. And that sort of led to becoming a singer-songwriter and playing the guitar and writing that way. So I haven't written a book. I've written lots of screenplays and scripts. And when I met my husband, we started writing animated series, television shows for children. So we're sort of in the mix of that. And then I edit a lot of the work that he's done. So he does screenplays, and he also does, we were having this issue where it was hard finding work because of, being a writer or whatever in the film world. And we were having this big discussion on how a lot of the things being produced were intellectual property.
Yeah.
So I was like, why don't you write a book and that'll be intellectual? Like take one of your scripts, turn it into a novella, and now it's intellectual property, and maybe someone will turn it into a movie. So that was like sort of the end goal. And so that's what we were kind of working on. But I mean, I'm so busy on this end. So I'm just like, here, like figure out how to self-publish, and like, I'll illustrate your cover for you and do all the marketing stuff that if you need help. But like, you really got to figure this out on your own. And I feel like it's probably a lot more complicated and a lot more immersed than you realize. So we're sort of back and forth on that. But in terms of writing, that's like sort of the scope of what I do. Plus, the occasional journaling and the one day hopes of turning all the random cinematic things I've experienced in my life into a story. I told it to one of my friends, and he was like, this should be a 1-hour special on HBO. And I was like, I don't know. I used to do stand-up as well, so that was part of my writing. So it's kind of dabbling in everything.
I would say you're a writer. Yeah, that's a lot of
right.
That's a lot of writing.
It is a lot of writing, and yeah.
And I mean, even though being a reader is you're reinterpreting the story.
Yeah.
And that's engaging with it. I mean, I'm always telling my students, and also like kids who, when I've gone and done school visits and stuff, and they're asking like, well, how do you picture this character? And what does this look like? That whole idea that when the writer writes a book, that's only like half of the process. And then when the reader reads it, they're recreating the story in their mind. And so the reader is an important part of a book's experience. So like if I'm trying to translate a story from my imagination into words so that I can deliver it into your brain, so then you receive the words and then you reinterpret it into images. Not everyone reads exactly like that, where they're seeing the images, but I think a lot of people do, especially we live in such a cinematic culture. So when I say like, I don't know what this character looks like to you, I know what they look like to me, but in your head, they could be totally different,
Yeah, that's one really important thing I always try and encourage the people in my voiceover workouts when we practice reads is like, especially when it's commercial reads and you're talking about like a burger, like you have to imagine everything that you're saying, even if it's like, even if it's just allowing the words to do the job, if you're visualizing it, it changes the experience of the read for the listener entirely.
Yeah.
And if you're imagining it, you may have a different visualization in your mind, but you're still going to get that subtlety of like vision. It's just so cool how communication works that way. And how our brain waves just like connect to that.
Well, I remember like when I was doing my audiobooks and the director I was working with, she said, like, I was asking her, like, what about when I'm reading different characters? She said, different readers do it different ways, but rather than thinking about like doing a voice, like you're thinking about inhabiting that character,
their intention.
and then like it's going to come out in the voice, and you can do some intentional things with that, but versus like, okay, now this character is going to sound like this, it's more like kind of trying to sink into who that person is in the context of the scene. Absolutely. And if you're reading a first person narration, it's also going to be, theoretically, it's the narrator's version of that person's voice, so it's not a voice. It's not a totally different thing.
A lot of being an audiobook narrator incorporates being an actor. I don't think I would ever be able to do any of the text justice if I couldn't perform it,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one thing a lot of people who are interested in becoming an audiobook narrator is to take acting classes, to really understand what it's like to play off someone, because when you're in front of a book, you're not playing off anyone. You really have to have the imagination to experience something that's not even happening in front of you authentically, I guess. So it's actually cool that I'm really glad that the director mentioned that to you, because it really isn't just about the voice. It's about the actual performance of the character itself. I'm kind of like a purist when it comes to this stuff. I'm a purist with audio. I'm a purist with like performance and text. I'm like, it's like obsessive. I love it. Because you experienced what it was like to record with a director in studio, like what were some things that like surprised you? What did you learn? What was like your favorite thing about it?
I loved, because I was the author of those books, I loved that I knew the audiobook was not gonna have any misread lines, like when you write something, you just hear it in your head a certain way. So I knew it was going to be exactly how I heard it in my head when I wrote it. That was my favorite thing about reading my own books. I also, one of the hard things was, at least with the way Random House did it, I don't know what your experience has been, but they're because they sometimes use the audiobooks to help teach reading, where like a kid will have a book open, the text, and listening to the audio. They don't want it has to be word for word exact. And as the writer, this is another thing where it's hard being the writer. I just constantly wanted to edit, like, why did I should have, it's the same, like when I'm giving readings, I'm always changing it a little bit while I read, because I think it sounds better. And I don't know, when I was doing those and it had to be just verbatim what I wrote, it was painful sometimes. I just be like, why did I write it like that? Or like end up writing these like tongue twisters where it's like, I should have read this out loud to myself, because
too much
cannot say these two words back to back.
It's funny, the plight of the narrator. Much alliteration.
I mean, I'm sure you come across those phrases where it's just like, if the author had thought for a minute about how this sounds aloud.
Before I even start, like before I even press record, I have a page of tongue twisters and like, I don't know, like breath control things. And I like plow through them before I get in. Cause if I don't do it, I'll have like processing, like I'll have a problem saying like the and of back to back for some reason.
Yeah.
That's funny that it's actually, it's really funny that you to experience both being the author and the narrator, and then being like,
yeah, like I could be mad at myself. I could be mad at that author, Sara Zarr, as the narrator, Sara Zarr. Like, oh, Sara Zarr.
Dang, that's Sara Zarr. Let's see. One of the questions I had written down was, I feel like this is such a standard question people might ask, but younger Sara Zarr, with her hopes and dreams. Do you remember what you aspired to be when you were younger?
Oh, Fidel, that is a complicated question. So I grew up in the 70s, and my mom became a born-again Christian. And we went to a church that was kind of part of the California 70s Jesus movement. And they were really big on end times theology.
Wow.
So actually, I did not imagine a future for myself, because I grew up with this idea that like the rapture was going to happen any second. So it's really hard. Well, there was a combination of that, plus the habit of kind of living in survival mode from my dad being an alcoholic and us being so financially insecure. Those two things combined, I just did not think about the future, or I didn't have dreams. It's really sad. Like, it sounds sad. It's fine. Like, I've had lots of therapy. Right. I'm over it now. But it is interesting because I didn't think, like, no one in my life was being like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I didn't think in those terms. It was partly surviving the day to day and also partly assuming like I was going to be raptured like next week. So I just, it was an escape for my mom. We talk about it a lot now. Like, she didn't mean to curtail my ability to think about the future, but it was just like how she was dealing with things at the time. So younger Sarah didn't really have a concept of like what I would be doing when I grew up, where I would like to live, even like the fact that I met my husband and we've been married like 32 years, but I was 16 when we met. And like, I wouldn't recommend that in general. It worked out for us, but there's still a part of me that's like, what if I had actually been able to like grow up and become an independent person and figure out who I was and what I wanted before I was like locked into all these, things like at age 19 or whatever. So, I don't know. I was just kind of like going along with whatever happened. So I didn't really start like thinking about what I want to do until my mid-20s, when I started thinking about being a writer. That was it. So I really didn't have like career dreams. I didn't have an alternate plan. I was just like, I'm just going to really try and do this. And it has to happen because it's the only thing that I know that I want to do. So that's why I stuck with it for 10 years before getting published, because I was just like, this has to happen because I don't know what else I'm going to do.
That's actually really inspirational, because
I don't know.
I think it is. You've come out the other end, but
not everyone does. I mean, I'm always careful when I'm teaching to like, or coaching people or whatever, I don't like to give easy platitudes to people. Just if you keep doing it and you stick to it, or you really try, like, you could do it, because
easier said than done.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are outside of your control that might not allow that to happen. So I'm a pragmatist in that way, but it did end up working out for me and being something I still feel lucky to do. But I still have that feeling like I have to make this work because I don't really have any like job skills other than writing and teaching writing and all of that. So
I am like amazed with that answer. It was absolutely not what I expected. And I'm like so fascinated. I like feel like I want to dive into that more and be like, because to really go through that in a way, because there's so much pressure. Like, I mean, I experienced a lot of pressure growing up, being like, you have to achieve great things.
Yeah.
And not to say that I did the opposite of that, because there was something within me always being like, I'm kind of competitive. I'm like, I want to be great. I want to do things. I don't know what that's going to be. There's a lot of things I don't like. There's a lot of things I do like, and dabbled with a lot of trauma in between. Mm-hmm. And to come out the other end and know that, I mean, to persevere 10 years to do something that you believe in and want to do, and then share it with other people, I think that's a really beautiful way of coping and providing.
Yeah, I feel like becoming a writer helped me become myself, my true self, in a way that nothing else sort of that I was on the path of was going to do that. And it's important to me, you know. I'm happy that I get to do this because it feels like who I am, even though there's like bad things about making it your identity. Because then when like if your career's not going well, your identity just takes a hit, you know. And I've been through that. I mean, I'm out the other end of that too, because when I first started out and my first book was this big splash, it got made into a movie. I had a number of successful books after that, and then I just kind of took a dip. Things change, new writers come up, you know, the marketplace changes. And when that first started to happen, I was really like in a bad way, because I was just like, who am I if I'm not like getting this amount of attention, you know, that I need for my poor little codependent inner child. But then I worked through that, you know, so now I actually enjoy my career a lot more, because I don't feel entitled to it. Entitlement it's a bad road. It's going to end you up at bitterness.
Yeah.
I think you just have to be grateful for the good things that happen.
Even
if they don't happen, you can't be like, God damn it, that was supposed to be mine, you know?
Yeah, it's not sustainable.
Right. Those are totally understandable, normal human feelings that you can have for a couple days, but you can't like live there.
Right. Yeah. And I think that expresses the essence of your success, the perseverance and the, you know, waiting for the ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
To go through. Which one of your books became a movie?
It was that first book, Story of a Girl.
Okay.
And that was another thing that took about 10 years, because it was optioned in 2007. And then there was like the housing crash and the writer's strike and all this stuff, where it didn't end up really coming together until 2017. And then it was produced by A&E. It ended up on Lifetime. It was directed by Kira Sedgwick, became her directorial debut. It was really fun. I got to go to the set. Like, it was a dream come true. It's just one of those things that's not guaranteed to happen at all when you're a writer. So that's another thing I feel lucky to have experienced.
It's really amazing. That's like super fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Being on set is super cool, especially for your book. That's so cool.
And they treat you, it's nice, you know. They're like, everyone, this is the author. It's nice, you know. It was a nice little day of feeling special. Yeah.
I love that. I didn't know that. That is so cool.
And really fun to watch actors work. I mean, talk about tedium. People who think they want to be movie stars.
Oh, so much work. So
tedious. It's so much waiting around. I mean,
yes.
And for, you know, something small budget without big names like this, it's not like you're just retiring to your trailer while your stand-in does the work. I mean, those young actors were just like
there for 14
doing
hours.
all of it, you know. I loved watching that and hearing them say my words. It was like, wow, that's weird. Yeah, it was cool.
Yes, that's one of my other favorite things that keeps me going. Being on set is like infuses me. I think it's the energy on set with the crew and
so collaborative.
Yes.
Which writing a book is so solitary, and filmmaking is so collaborative. It takes so many people to like just make a scene happen.
Yeah. Like over 20 sometimes. And if it's small budget, it's at least 2 to 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another way. I guess I forgot that I make money.
Acting. Yeah.
Acting. Yeah. It's I think that's so cool that you experienced being on set. I think it's so fulfilling to know that you're not just an author. You've experienced all these things throughout your life. And I think that's what makes your writing so dimensional, because it's not just like what's happening. It's like you can tell that, I don't know. I loved narrating your book. There was just something so beautiful about everything that was written, that it wasn't just like, this is what's happening to a young girl.
Right.
Literally reading your book is probably one of the main inspirations for creating this podcast. Is like, I want to know what was going on with Sarah's life, because there's clearly more than, like, intuitively I felt like I knew. I was like, there's got to be more. Like, she seems fascinating. I need to understand.
I do think that because I think a lot about that 10 years that it took me from when I first finished a book to when my first one came out. And I think the fact that my first book didn't come out till I was in my mid 30s, and that I collected a lot of life experience before that, has ultimately made my work so much better. Even though when I was 25, I would have loved it if it was just like, it just happened right when I wanted it to happen.
Of course, right.
But I think that would have been bad for my writing. I think the time that I waited and just lived my life has all gone, and like worked jobs, like it's all gone into being able to create worlds that are real. That's like, reality is my thing. Like, if I had the imagination to write a fantasy novel, that'd be great, but I don't. So I really work to make reality feel, to really make it feel like these are real people in the real world. And I think being someone in their early 50s now, just the older I get, the more that enhances what I'm able to do with that and with the depth of my work, to just have the life experience of being around for a long time.
I remember reading a quote recently that I think it was directed to actors, but I think it applies to any creative field where there's like these landmarks of jobs that you try to attain, but it's about what you do with life in between.
Yeah.
And I think that's another tidbit for anyone who wants to become an author or wants to become an audiobook narrator. Is one of the things that was really lucky for me was all of the random chapters of my life and all the random job experiences I've done have actually allowed the content of things that people have written to find me.
Yeah.
And when I read the books, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I think I understand why they asked me to try out to be a narrator for this book. Because I've gone from like being a science teacher to in the music industry to like working in a cancer screening clinic and like being like all of these random things. And I remember doing all of them and feeling so lost, you know, like being like 17 to like 26 or something, being like, what am I doing?
It's a hard
with my
time of life. Yeah.
You know, like with other people's perspectives, it looks like I have no direction. But I felt like, I mean, I always knew, I was like, if I ever have to play this character in my life, at least I know what it's like. You know, at least I'll know what it's like to like experience it firsthand, and I can share that with the world. So I think that, yeah, it's.
Well, you have to, like, when you're self-employed and it's so much of your work is just you and the screen, if that becomes your whole life, you're living your whole life just through this like screen, you don't have anything to bring to it. Like, you have to live. I think that's something a lot of, I teach for an MFA program, and you know, a lot of the students are in their early 20s, like they've gone straight from undergrad to grad school and they want to go right into publishing, which I understand that desire, but also like you have to get some life under your belt to bring dimension and depth to your work and to kind of develop that compassion and empathy for how strange and complicated humans are.
Yes.
To be able to write about them in a way that is real, you know? So yeah, I think that's a big piece of advice, is just like live. If your artistic dreams aren't happening right now, just like live your life, do a bunch of different stuff. It's all going to come back and feed that work.
Yeah, that seed of creativity, I feel like it doesn't go away. It will always follow people. And
yeah, if you're called to do it, you'll keep finding it. Yeah.
How long have you been teaching for?
Oh, off and on for like the last 10 years. There are these low residency MFA programs where so that students don't have to like move to where the school is or quit their jobs or their lives or anything to get their MFA. So for about 9 days at the beginning of each semester, you're all on campus together doing workshops and seminars and planning your semester. And then the rest is submitted via email throughout. So it's kind of a hybrid, distance and in person. So I do most of it just from home. And then the in-person residencies.
That sounds really fun.
A lot of writers covet these gigs because, it's another little paycheck to go along with everything else.
Yeah. Teaching is really great. I think
I get a lot out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. How many students do you usually have at a time?
Usually just like 2 or 3. That's another thing with these kind of programs. The job title is actually faculty mentor. And so you're just kind of doing one-on-one mentoring with just a couple of students. So there might be like, say, 8 or 9 students in the cohort of writing for young people. And there's like 4 or 5 mentors, and you each take a couple. And so you're working really in depth with them and their work over the semester.
You basically guide them through the things that they're reading. That's cool.
They submit a packet of work every month that's like 25 pages of writing, a few like annotations on the books they've been reading for the program. They have to do a little bit of critical writing in the second half, and just kind of teaching them everything you possibly can about writing and revising and literature and all that.
So when you're not writing or teaching, are you also reading? And what are you reading?
Oh, yeah. Right now, this is kind of funny that you asked this because it's summer, right? So summer reads. So I'm reading a book I got for free. If you're a member of Amazon Prime, every month they send you an email where it's like, you can pick one of these free books for your Kindle. So I picked one last month, and it's like, the plot is so absurd and unbelievable. And I'm just enjoying that. I'm not going to say what book it is because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but it's just kind of funny. But I have right now, what I'm looking forward to reading next back there on my desk is Nina LaCour's new book called Yerba Buena. I'm looking forward to that. And I'm revising my own book. Oh, I'm also reading a nonfiction book called Salty. It's like essays about, it's sort of taking the concept of, if you could host a dinner party with like any 10 people from history, who would they be? So this author, Alyssa Wilkinson, picked like her 10 people and wrote a little essay on each of them. And it's also a little bit of a food memoir, and there's some recipes in there. I really like that.
That sounds awesome. I think I might read that next.
I'm enjoying that.
Sarah, I think
Friedel,
this is the end of our podcast.
I think it is the end. Yeah, I think I'm ready for lunch.
Yeah. Speaking of food, I loved talking with you. I love getting to know you. I've learned so much.
I enjoyed it too. And I feel a little bit like you're a kindred spirit. So you'll have to stay in touch, and I'll keep watching your work from afar. And I know you've narrated some great books, and I know you'll keep doing it. I'm looking forward to seeing where this podcast goes and being able to recommend it to folks.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited too. Well, thank you so much. And maybe I'll have you back again, because I could probably talk to you forever. We could talk about my childhood, my religious trauma.
That'll be like episode 12, diving deep with Sara Zarr. We'll just do a whole season on me. That's what people really want.
I think so, actually. Like after this, I was like, okay, I'm going to have her back for sure, because we just like crested the surface and we want to go in a little further. Well, enjoy lunch. Enjoy the rest of your summer.
Yeah. Stay cool.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's hot in here.
Go surf those Pacifica waves.
Yeah. I'll go in there and be like, Sarah, this one's for you.
Do it.
Okay. Take care. And thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you.